While you're humble aboard, please ensure that you're wearing a face mask, ensuring also social distancing of at least 2 to 3 meters when you are in a hot concentration of more than 5 to 10 people. You'll contract COVID-19 and you will succumb. So please ensure that you are protected in that regard. We are also getting into a major conversation on the protection of refugees, responses, if you will, during this COVID-19 pandemic. I have a protection coordinator from Kafomi talking about the care and assistance for forced migrants and ordinary support to refugees, majorly the urban refugees within this country, and largely the protection coordinator, that is Florence Namugere-Masi. She's joining us right now on this beautiful morning on Morning at NTV. We are also joined by Mr. Wisdom Goodluck Karungu. He is a refugee from DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's also a research facilitator. He's also a field officer working with the young African refugees for integral development. I've been expediting some operations with these groups, not only with Yorid, but also Kafomi and many other field officers undergoing some investigations to ascertain whether or not many refugees are actually pulling through this COVID-19 pandemic without any hurdles. But then guess what? Some couldn't even front 150,000 household income on a daily, in a month. They couldn't spend 150,000 Uganda shillings. So that is a callous disaster right there, because we are talking about health becoming too expensive. You can even spend 200,000 Uganda shillings in a day. That is for a fact. So if you're spending 150,000 in a whole month, that is 4 weeks. A recipe for disaster. Let me not preempt. Wisdom and Florence are here. A very good morning, Florence and Wisdom. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, you're doing amazing work at Yorid. She's doing amazing work at Kafomi, and I'm really glad and honored that I'm in your midst right now. So largely, we have 1.5 million refugees who are watching this morning show right now and are wondering, well, what is there in store for us moving forward? Does the government really care? Do the host citizens really care about us? The donor countries who cut the food rations and so forth, do they really care? But then largely, Florence, give us a situation analysis of how the refugees have been grappling under this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Ronnie, for hosting me.
Indeed.
Thank you for the kind introductions.
Indeed.
As you earlier said, I'm Masi Florence Namugere. I work for care and assistance for forced migrants, Kafomi. And basically, our focus as an organization, we focus on emergency displacement or emergency preparedness. And basically, like you said, we are not only focusing in urban refugees, but we are also focusing at the border entries.
Indeed.
We are supporting, currently, you've heard about the Bujo crisis. We are supporting that axis. We are supporting in Toroko. We are supporting Kisoro, as well as Chikube at the axis towards that border location. So basically, we also focus on post-recovery as well as durable solutions. And of which, when we talk about durable solutions, definitely that is where we talk about access to livelihoods, how to better persons of concern, how to improve their dignity, because the assumption is that when you come, when you come to Uganda across borders, the most important thing we are focusing on is how do we ensure that our services are offered in dignity, that there is that respect for humanity. So that is mainly what we focus on. Now, going back to what you have asked in terms of the situation analysis, you have to realize that the refugees we have two different types out per se. We have those that are urban refugees that are governed by the urban refugee policy, but we also have those that are in settlement. Of course, ideally as a country, it is more onto the settlement that emphasis, but if we have, when you look at the Refugee Act of 2006 as well as the regulations, refugees are empowered to be able to access livelihoods, to be able to access services at the same rate like the rest of the other nationals. So that's when we give birth to the component of urban refugees. Now, how is the situation like? Is that, for example, in Kampala, when you come to the urban centers, it's based on self-reliance. You should be able to provide for yourself. Then for those in the settlement, they are given a particular amount of support, that is from WFP, from other partners like UNHCR, yes, and other partners definitely, because when you look at the UN agencies, they do not do direct implementation. They are being supported by partners. So basically the situation has been quite alarming, because when you look at the world World Food Survey, it showed that majority of the refugees actually live below $0.5. Now, how does that tell you? And that was some time ago before COVID-19 actually came up. So the situation actually becomes more and more dire. They are becoming more extremely vulnerable. And because
less than 3,000 Uganda shillings.
Yes.
Wow.
And for example, when you look at the youth bracket, about 40% of the whole population are the youth, and then coupled by women and children who are about 80%.
I see.
So that tells you that the situation actually is the situation is quite alarming, because people have got to grapple to be able to feed. So we've seen situations, especially during COVID, people losing employment. Already they are vulnerable, but again they are losing actually the employment that they had. And remember, the biggest we have, especially within the context, is that first of all, as Ugandans, we are quite grappling with the high unemployment rates. Now we have the population is actually streaming up, but we do not have a lot of opportunities where we have people being employed formally. So basically they have to engage into formal livelihoods, which is again not sustainable enough. So what we've seen with especially with refugees across is that first of all, the food rations keep on reducing because of global issues, you understand. Downcuts in terms of funding. But for the refugees, for example, in the settlements, they have an opportunity to engage in agriculture, which is again the backbone of Uganda. So, but again, the land is not sufficient enough for them to be able to engage in commercial agriculture.
So subsistence. Subsistence,
yes. But again, we thank the government, because government gives them the opportunity to be able to go and rent out land. You understand that? So that in itself, they are able to substitute on the already existing kind of livelihoods. But for me, let me go back to the urban refugees.
So how are they pulling through?
The urban refugees, of course, the number of opportunities that are there, but one thing that you need to understand is that very critically is that, first of all, they are constrained because of the language barrier. You realize that in Kampala we have diversities in terms of nationality. We have Somalis, we have Congolese, we have Eritreans, different nationalities. But when they come here, and remember they are coming from different kind of curriculums, so when they join here, majority in Uganda, we are using more of English and of course our local languages, so it becomes hard for them to do the integration. As a midst, of course, there have been sessions where they're enrolled to learn English, but still that takes quite some time. So that in itself affects them. And then we, of course, even when you look at the available opportunities in terms of the livelihood, youth funds, all those, we still have challenges.
Interventions that need a national ID,
we still have challenges.
That they don't have access to.
Yes, we still have challenges, refugees accessing them. Because even in some situations, some of the stakeholders actually have not yet understood the plight of refugees. So it's quite daring. The situation is quite there, because just imagine if you're living less than $0.5, what is that? When you have got, especially let's say, look about Kampala, you've got to access education, you've got to access health, you've got to access food, because all these are your basic rights. So the situation is quite daring, but again, we continue to advocate with government, we continue to advocate with most of the stakeholders where we've been in meetings like KCCA, and we are saying, wow, is there need for us to review policies to ensure that at least there is inclusion?
In a nutshell, Florence Mercy, the refugees within these settlements are being supported by the government, but those, the 80,000 within Kampala, surrounding environs, are not supported by government. They are not receiving any aid. And that's where you come in to help.
I think, Ronnie, it will be an understatement when you say they are not provided by government. Because remember, as we are here, government is the sole mandate to issue asylum space for refugees. So that a mere fact that they've given them the asylum space, already they are providing support. But again, it is not that government has relegated its responsibilities. I would love to really re-echo that. Because government gives them the space, but again, government does the monitoring.
I see.
You understand? Because government may not do direct implementation, and that's why we, the partners, come in and ensure that we offer those services. So how have you largely been helping the urban refugees and those other refugees alike? The urban refugees currently, as I said, because of resource constraints, we do not have enough resources to basically supports the refugees, but we work through a network. Because one of the things that we've learned in the humanitarian response is the component of partnership and networking. So we do a lot of referrals. My colleague here from Yarid will be telling you basically how have they been able to support in terms of livelihoods. So basically for us, what we will do, we'll do the basics. We do the assessments, and then we refer to our colleagues like Yarid, we refer to colleagues like IRC, like Mercy Corps, because for them, their niche is more into livelihoods. And the funds they've received is also more into livelihoods. But also beyond that, for purposes of sustainability, we engage in KCCA, because you realize that the refugees contribute quite a lot, especially those that are in informal sector. For example, when you look at the basically if you go on to the streets of Kisenyi, you would actually realize that majority of them are Somalis, majority of them are refugees. So they are contributing in terms of taxes. So basically, how do we ensure that there is inclusion of refugees even when they are planning? So we've met politicians, that is at the KCCA level, at the different levels. We are deliberating on some of these. If they are passing bylaws, if they are doing policy amendments, we should have inclusion of refugees into some of these.
All right, Namogere Florence Marcy, she is the protection coordinator at CAFOMI, that is Care and Assistance for Forced Migrants. During my preamble, when we were kicking off this show, I did mention and say that if host citizens or citizens within the host nation are grappling 10 times worse, then it is 20 times worse for the refugees. Imagine when the government comes out and it says 8-point-something million Ugandans are living under $1. That is 3,000 Uganda shillings. And then Florence comes in and she says, well, for the refugees, it's 0.01. That's how bad the situation is. Why preempt? We do have a refugee within our midst. Wisdom Karungu Goodluck is a refugee from the Democratic Republic of Congo, also research facilitator and also field officer working with the Young African Refugees for Integral Development. Tell us what the Young African Refugees for Integral Development is, and then we can talk about how you as a refugees and others within your boots have been grappling during this COVID-19 pandemic. Good to have you, Wisdom.
Well, good morning to you, Mr. Romeo Topsiku. I am very much honored that you have hosted me together with my colleague Florence. Actually, let me call her a colleague because we all work in humanitarian fields,
same conglomerate,
in same institutions.
Yes, sir.
As you just mentioned, my name is Wisdom Karungu Goodluck. I am a refugee from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and I work with Young African Refugees for Integral Development, and the YARID in short. It has been empowering lives of refugees since 2008. All right. That is not only looking at the urban refugees, but also looking at the rural ones, that is in the settlement, because we have a branch of our institution in Chaka 2 refugee settlement, and we have been really based or aiming to stand with the refugees in the livelihood settings. We have been very much concerned that refugees are being limited to several services and limited in so many things due to the language barrier. And that is why the YARID came up with an idea of teaching the refugees the language, teaching the refugee children whom their parents cannot afford to pay for school fees, to go for private schools. And the YARID has come up with an idea of teaching them English. We also have adult people who do not speak English from different nationalities of the refugees, and the YARID is also still encouraged to teach them also the English. Not only that, because the world where it's heading, it is really being concerned and looking at the technology. We also came up with an idea of teaching them the computer, how to use computer, ICT. Oh, thank you so much. And we have not limited ourselves from those activities. We have also looked at making them self-reliant, like teaching them the tailoring. We also teach them tailoring for free. Not only refugees, we also teach the vulnerable nationals. Ugandans also are inclusive, the beneficiaries. Not only that, we have looked at that refugees may need, or some of them do need, to apply for some job opportunities. And we have come up with an idea of a GRP, that is a job readiness. Not only that, we have stood and have been standing with refugees during the COVID-19 era, and during the lockdowns, we are having at Yarid a very big team of the COVID-19 response task force, and we have really been standing with vulnerable refugees, distributing food and non-food materials to them, and also looking most especially to the elderly people, the people with chronic disease, those are orphans, those are very, very vulnerable populations. Those are the ones that we have been looking at. I will come back to the employment status of refugees. You know, just as my my friend Florence here from Kafomi has recently mentioned, in Uganda, you know, Uganda is hosting 1,500,000.
Yeah, 1.5.
Yes, 1.5 refugees from different nationalities, and these ones. Some of them, or let me say that an estimated number of 80,000 are living in the urban, and
Kampala.
that is probably Kampala, yes. An estimated number of 80,000 out of the 1,500,000.
Yeah.
And these people that are living in Kampala, or these refugees that are living in the urban area, are not having the same rights like the ones living in the settlement. These ones are self-reliant. They have to make sure that they take care of themselves and take care of their ones. You understand? So there is two settings of their employment. Some are employed formally, and others are self-employed, while others employ others.
I see.
You understand? So it is quite very understandable that refugees, when it comes to the self-employment, they are really allowed to establish their own businesses. They are allowed to operate in the trading centers. They are allowed just pay taxes like normal
But what has been hard for the refugees is to get, you know, inducted in the formal employment spheres. Getting work in your host nation has been very, very hard for the refugees. So we want to talk about those challenges and a lot more. Teenage pregnancies, Florence, have taken root among the refugee settlements. Like I said, if it got worse for the host nation 10 times, it goes 20 times worse for the refugees. So if we had thousands of teenagers getting pregnant within our country, now for the refugees, it became worse because poverty was the biggest driver of all those teenage pregnancies taking root within this country, and the refugee settlements are like. It's a beautiful Monday and a very great way to execute this Monday by NTV Uganda, you know, adhering to its corporate social responsibility as a diverse and also inclusive platform, talking about refugees and so forth. We'll be compounding more on this conversation shortly after this break. Back to Morning at NTV. I still do have Florence Masi Namugere. She is a protection coordinator at Kafomi Care and Assistance for Forced Migrants, and also Wisdom Karungu Goodluck, a refugee from DRC. He is a field officer, research facilitator, working for the Young African Refugees for Integral Development. Well, we are still talking about how hard it is for them to get formal employment. I mean, it is hard for you as a citizen of this country to even get employment of any sort, so it must be compounded suffering for the refugees. Also, teenage pregnancies are like. If you're talking about thousands of teenagers also getting pregnant, it should be compounded suffering for the refugees and so forth. So let's talk about that and a lot more with Florence and Wisdom. Florence, how bad is it? How dire is the situation when it comes to induction into the formal employment sphere for the refugees?
Thank you very much.
Indeed.
But I think, as earlier on highlighted, is that one of the biggest component we have. First of all, as Ugandans, we are still grappling with the unemployment rate. So it's quite constraining again when we have, again, an additional needs, yet the available opportunities are not sufficient enough to meet the needs of the Ugandans. So when you again, as I earlier on said, that we have about 40%. One thing we need to recognize is that majority of the refugees are actually skilled. They come out of their country skilled. We have lawyers, we have medical doctors, we even have people who have been judges in their countries.
Now the viewer is wondering, then why is it so hard for them to get jobs in this country? Let's talk about those challenges.
It becomes hard in this country because I've already told you that there is limited space for them to be able to join the employment.
Employers are prioritizing Ugandans.
Then the other component is that, for example, when they join here, because they're coming from different countries, most of their certificates
CV
are in different languages. So basically, when they join, when they come to Uganda, that means they must be able to translate those documents so that you're able to understand, if you're an employer, to understand that, okay, this person did Bachelor of Social Work, this person did a Bachelor of Laws, did all the
But initially it would be hard because again, the CV is in either Arabic or French.
Yes.
So you need to translate
You need to translate
at a cost of $23.
It's about, yes, about 100,000 Ugandan shillings. So the question is, how many of those can afford to actually pay that amount of money to be able? But also the procedures for you to be able to translate actually are quite, there is a lot of bureaucracy. So it becomes quite challenging, and to some people who are not patient or who are not experienced with the system might give up in the end of the day. So that basically it's already a barrier. And again, we said earlier on the component of language barrier, that as much as agencies we are trying to teach the basics in terms of communication, but again it becomes quite, it's a major impediment when it comes to the component of access to employment. So it's quite very challenging. And also the other aspect is the information on where the jobs are. Because if you do not have access to information, then that basically also becomes quite a big aspect. Although of course as agencies, again, as he was saying, my colleague, we've put up like hubs. For example, under NRC they have an internet hub, and basically here you can go do the search and you're able to have access to information, which definitely of course has implications on how you're able to have access to other information. But again, this is not enough. So we are saying the component is that the other impediment, we also realize that again some refugees are being asked to pay for work permits. Yes,
work permits. They're paying for them.
Yes, because the component is that again we still have some of our stakeholders that have not really either grasped or understood the plight of refugees. That, for example, they will find them somewhere and they say, where is your work permit if you're working? And yet majority of the refugees again are doing more of voluntary work. So they are being asked for the work permit. But remember again that according to the Refugee Act, the only document that they must present, it is either their ID, refugee ID, or the proof of verification or family attestation, which should be their identification format. But again, some employers are saying, no, please, we need a national ID. And yet it is illegal for refugees to own national IDs. But again, never to tire is that as an organization as CAFOMI, but also through our collective with other partners, again, we are saying, okay, beyond that, can we advocate? And we say, for example, when you look at most of the available youth livelihood opportunities in terms of the funds at the different divisions within the country, majority of them, again, bar refugees from accessing these funds, because again they are either asked for national ID, but also when you look at the whole policy, it is not inclusive of refugees. It's more constrained. The strings attached to these funds, the grants, are more favoring for Ugandans as opposed to refugees. So even when somebody had the skill to be able to start their own business, because they are very creative, I'm telling you, even when they had that, they are limited by the resources. So definitely what happens is that either they have got to again go into casual labor, and of course they're not able to utilize their skills, which is quite a very big constraint. It's
very alarming. Wisdom, good luck, Karungu. We also do know that the refugees cannot have access to the social protection programs that they, like the Youth Livelihood Fund, Uganda Women Entrepreneurship Program, because they simply do not have national IDs and so forth. What are some of the other impediments making life difficult for our refugees right here?
Okay, well, as my colleague Florence has just mentioned, the very difficult and the challenges that are being faced by refugees, most especially in the employment status, are those aspects that have been mentioned by Florence. Those ones are really, really daring, the refugee employment status, because when they are asking them, for example, for work permit, this is not quite easy for a refugee to acquire. It takes him a time, it's very hard, and maybe to acquire it, it will need him or her to pay for it.
Do you think these factors are making it hard for the refugees to contribute to the development of their host nations?
Yes.
And if yes, what should be done to, make the situation any different?
Okay. You know that they are the policies that are governing refugees among the Ugandans. According to the Constitution of Uganda and according to the acts and the regulations, it is really said that the rights of nationals should be similar as the rights of refugees, except when it comes to political
Agree.
Yes.
to
Representation.
to political representation. Like refugees cannot vote, refugees cannot run for political events, refugees cannot run for political services in all aspects. But for all other rights, the Constitution entitles them the very same rights, but it is being violated at some points by nationals or by officials that do not understand that these acts and regulations are there. So we need some people to advocate for refugees by standing for them and speak out and teach the other people, train them that these regulations and these acts are there, and refugees should be considered as humans as the citizens.
Have you received enough support from agencies like UNHCR that are mandated to give support to the refugees? I did expedite some investigations or surveys with you and Lois Neomunjeri and other people from Kafomi, IGREC, and also URED. So we were actually doing some investigations and we found out that some refugees were not even spending more than 150,000 Uganda shillings in a month. And some did not even expect any kind of formal employment in the next 6 months. And I was like, okay, what needs to be done here? Where NGOs like UNHCR and other UN agencies that are mandated to help refugees, do you feel they've rendered enough support to refugees during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Actually, according to that question, not really. They have not rendered enough support, but they have tried their best.
I hear you.
Because during the COVID-19 pandemic, during the lockdowns, you know that everyone has been targeting and endeavoring to put a plate on table. And I really thank and I really applaud the UNHCR and other humanitarian institutions like Kafomi, URED, and others because they have been kind enough to come up for food and non-food items distribution during the lockdowns. UNHCR also distributed money for these urban refugees during the former lockdown. They were giving 85,000 per person.
Which came at the end of the 42-day lockdown. Go ahead, Wisdom.
Yes, for the 42-day lockdown, I know some institutions have also come up with some support.
Yeah.
UNHCR, I haven't seen, but I believe they are still thinking about it because they are like our mother.
Yes.
We as the refugees, and they do think about us. Actually, something that should be done for the UNHCR and other humanitarian institutions, like my friend Florence had just mentioned, you know, that more and many of these refugees are very creative, and many of them really wish and want to be self-reliant. Because some of them are not qualified academically, others are qualified, but their academic reports are limited due to the language barrier. They are not translated, so that's why they want to be creative. They want to create businesses. They want to do this for their own support. So these institutions should stand for them and support them for these small businesses that they are wishing to establish. Those ones that are really willing to learn, these institutions should stand with them and teach them, train them, give them different life skills that one should really
Wisdom, good like Karungu, very, very, very outspoken. Thank you very much for that submission.
But I also,
Florence, yeah, go ahead.
I also think is that I think each and every organization has different mandates, and so most of the time when we are deliberating on issues, of course the aspect of mandate comes out. Definitely, UNHCR has its own mandate. Globally, they are mandated for refugees, yes, but when it comes to countries, again the governments take the responsibility of mandate. So their role is more of the oversight, but also to ensure that they do lobby, they do advocate, especially where they see violation of rights. So to ensure that actually people live a dignified life and more of a productive
Speaking
life.
of violations of rights, we did notice a skyrocketing case of teenage pregnancies during this COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 measures like the lockdown affected us, the citizens, the host nation. We did have many of our teenagers, before this heinous scourge of teenage pregnancies. Kabale, 12,000 teenage mothers. That's how callous the situation is. One jurisdiction. So in the case of the refugee settlements and urban refugees, help us understand what the situation is on the ground and what are some of the push factors leading to this problem becoming so dire.
Thank you. I think, let me just conclude what I was saying. I think the biggest we have currently is that more of our laws are more into rhetoric as opposed to actual enforcement.
I agree.
So if one of the things that we will do is to do, again, review and do amendments to ensure that actually there is actual inclusion of refugees into these livelihood opportunities. That will take us quite a long way. And then, of course, we continue with the advocacy. But we cannot do this unless we've done a review of the policies and ensure that actually we have actual inclusion, and then we move from being rhetoric to actual employment. Now, going back to the component that you have raised, it's quite alarming, and for me as a mother, again, it's really causes me to worry a lot and to think again. I've just looked at how the situation is countrywide. I've been seeing people parading a picture of recent. I just saw there is a picture running on the social media of about a 13-year-old girl with a baby, and the child did not even know that she was carrying a baby.
Indeed.
And when you look at the story, it's actually somebody convincing her that I will give you A, B, C, D, and then of course entices her into sexual relations and violates her rights as a child. One thing that we have to understand is that we went through surveys, we've realized that actually most of the perpetrators of violence against the young girls, but also the boys, we've had boys that have been violated against, are actually close relatives.
I see.
People that are within the proximities, people that they trust, because it's hard for a child to engage in with the person they do not trust.
So it's the breadwinner.
We've realized that actually majority of the people that do the violation are actually the close relations,
I see.
or the people that are close within them. So one of the things that actually has skyrocketed, of course, COVID has had quite a big impact. Every day when we receive survivors of violence, majority of them you will hear it was poverty because I was trying to fend, but other people, for example, in Kampala, they would tell you that the places where they walk through are dark spots. So most of them are either defiled on the way to the markets or when they are coming out of their way, and that's where we've always advocated with KCCA that if you're talking about safer cities for safer people, then definitely we need to ensure that there is lighting in all these locations. But the closure of schools has quite had a big impact because most of the time when an idle mind is always in the devil's workshop, as they always say. So when we have children more in schools, then definitely we shall be able to reduce on this, because at least we reduce them from a lot of perpetrators that will be surrounding them.
But you and I know very well that even when schools had been reopened, or when schools were largely open, even before this pandemic, access to education, even health for the refugees was very, very hard. Talk to us about that, because we need to put in place a favorable environment where more refugees, when we reopen, go back to the school system, because even before the pandemic, many couldn't access education. Yeah,
of course, when you look at our policy, the Ugandan policy, the assumption is that it's free education.
Indeed.
But ideally, there are other fees that must be met. For example, in Kampala, majority of the schools, like the whole of the Kampala, the least amount is 150. So basically, if somebody is grappling to feed hand to mouth, definitely, do you think they are going to prioritize education? No, they're not going to prioritize education. And then the other challenge we also have is that, for example, if somebody has crossed at the age of 13 and then they are telling them to either go back to P1, just imagine that as a child. Would you really accept? Definitely some of them would either opt, because they've reached the adolescent stage. It's quite disturbing, as you understand. So they would rather advocate for skilling as opposed to going for formal education. So the problem of the component of actually fees, user fees at schools, is really quite a very big challenge. But again, I remember when we were celebrating the Day of the African Child, I remember very well, children raised a component and they said, make education free for all. At the Children's Parliament. Yes, at the Children's Parliament. They said, make education free for all and accessible for all. And again, you remember they did highlight on the aspect of discrimination when they're in schools. So these are some of the major impediments that actually make, even provoking those that are actually enrolled to drop out, because normally they are looked at as you know, a different whole. I remember one child was telling me that, you know, when we got these schools, they are calling us diplomats. Wow. So the component of the attitude in itself, and you know, we have begun to now to do a lot of engagement with the stakeholders to understand the plight of refugees, and also understand that when children are within the confines of Uganda, they are actually all children irrespective of their nationalities and diversities. Wisdom, good luck, Karungu. She has mentioned so many challenges. If you have any more that she has not hinted on, you can
actually divulge right here on Morning at NTV. But that aside, what do you want my government to do for you and any other refugees within your boots who are suffering and grappling at the onslaught of this COVID-19 pandemic? It's really heinous. I've been on the ground. I know wisdom how dire the situation is.
Yeah.
But then from your, from the horse's mouth, talk to the government, the implementers, and so forth. What you need to be done for you.
Actually, thank you so much, Romeo, and thank Florence so much. The government has been there for refugees. I cannot say that they have not assisted. They have been assisting on their level best, but there is some stages where they have not yet reached, because outside there we have those slums, we have those voiceless people among the refugees that have not been reached to, and they have not been heard. So actually the government should also increase their support to refugees according to how they know they are doing. I am requesting them to increase, especially not when it comes to refugees' basic needs like food, security and water, but also when it comes to education and mental health, because those are very big
psychological support.
Yes, psychological support that we can support refugees with, something we support with them tomorrow for 1 year, for 6 months, but we will have supported them for years in the near future and in the entire of their lives, because education is the key to life. And for refugees, if we assist them for education and mental health, we will have done a very big thing.
Access to health, yes.
Access to health.
I'm sure if there was clear access to contraception, we wouldn't be talking about this skyrocketing teenage pregnancies within the refugee settlements and urban refugees. Go ahead, good luck.
Actually, refugees have been also not accessing enough health care when it comes to their situation, their financial situation. Because, many refugees during the global pandemic era who had their small businesses, the small businesses collapsed. So they used the material and used also their small capitals, which means they remained stuck.
So government should also come up with a stimulus package for the refugees. When you talk about 100,000 Uganda shillings for the citizens, it should also include the refugees. Am I right?
They should also include the refugees, because according to the 2006 Act, it is said that when there is an opportunity of livelihood among the refugees, we should also include 30% of the nationals.
All right.
So we are distributing, we are sharing 70% to the refugees and 30% to the nationals. So they should also include some vulnerable refugees.
Good. Florence, you're talking about recommendations.
I think the biggest component is not about, handouts are not sustainable.
They're not.
And actually, in terms of, if you're talking about dignity for persons, it's less dignifying to focus on handouts.
And whenever government says this is a handout, yet it is taxpayers' money, I'm telling you, people like me and others within my fraternity are left, with no words.
And it takes some time, because just imagine, ask yourself, what is 100,000 shillings? Yes, it's a bail-off,
drop in the ocean.
But what is 100,000 shillings? Definitely, with all this crippling and the increasing needs within the societies. And the other thing, again, as he was highlighting, on the component of health, again, sometimes, when you're playing you play the devil's advocate, because you realize that, again, because the policy says that refugees must access services at the same front like the nationals. But already look at, even before the refugees, besides the refugees, just look at the Ugandan health system. It's already grappling, because the needs, actually the available resources do not match the needs of the communities. You realize, for example, Kampala, we have about 3 to 5 million people.
Indeed.
And then how many health centers?
A few.
And what is the capacity?
Indeed.
When we look at the doctor-patient ratio,
people in Katanga who can't even go to Mulago, which is free.
It's quite overwhelming. So again, then we have more people coming through. So that means already the needs are not matching with available resources.
The facilities are
so what comes to our mind is that, again, we need to do actual prioritization. When we do a needs analysis, under our colleagues from the now we've been looking at the National Development Plan 3. So basically we should be planning, and we are saying, what is the current population like in Uganda, and definitely how do we do resource allocation. For example, where are the priority areas? You have a situation where you always realize again that defense takes the biggest share.
Indeed.
But the health of people is very critical. We have education, which is very critical. Can we do more investments in health? Can we do more, like the saying goes, a health nation? Definitely, you'll have a stable economy. But when you have people who are not doing well mentally, people who are not doing well health-wise, even in terms of education, then definitely you'll have a crippled economy in the end. So for us, we are saying, advocacy again. Let us do review of the policies which are existing. If we are talking about refugees being mandated by the government, then that means definitely that all the available opportunities should be actually including refugees. And we should move away from the component of saying refugees, because actually we even stigmatize them the more. They're our brothers and sisters. We live with them. They have the same blood like us. So definitely all the policies should be inclusive of all the people that are within the jurisdiction of Uganda. That will take us quite a very long way.
Florence Namgere Marcy, Protection Coordinator at Kafomi Care and Assistance for Forced Migrants. They're doing really some great work, rendering services to the refugees. And also Mr. Wisdom Goodluck Karungu, he is a refugee from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We love those individuals. He's also a field officer and research facilitator working with the young African refugees for integral development. NTV Uganda shall continue to support the refugees within this country. We shall continue expounding more on our corporate socio responsibility in that regard, because this is a diverse and very inclusive non-partisan news organization, and Morning at NTV is the tool that wants to drive socio-inclusion among all Ugandans, because there are citizens who are living here, also Ugandans alike. You're my brothers and sisters. All right. Thank you very much, Marcy and Wisdom. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Mr. Romeo. I appreciate it a lot.
Indeed. We have the retired Supreme Court Judge Wilson Kanyehamba, legend, who is online and ready to interact with Mr. Stephen Mbide on the issue, the sticky issue of bail. The president is saying if you are a capital offender, you are corrupt, or you killed someone, murdered someone, it should be an eye for an eye. We should be holding you for 180 days before we issue any bail to you, so that you do not end up being killed by members of the public who have already proven you guilty, even though the judicial system hasn't, because there is that presumption of innocence before you are proven guilty. Yes, Stephen Mbide, very good morning. How is the retired Supreme Court Judge Wilson Kanyehamba doing this beautiful Monday morning?